Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on experience-based design. Today's webinar will be presented by Deborah Thompson, Director of Urgent Care Delivery Networks at NHS Elect, and we are also joined by Lisa Godfrey, Director at NHS Elect, who's worked closely with Deborah on producing the experience-based design. First, we have a few simple housekeeping points. This session is being recorded and therefore all attendees are muted to avoid background noise during the recording. If you have a question during the presentation, please type your question into the question box. Thank you, and I'll now hand over to you, Deb, for your presentation.
Thank you, Lena. Hi, I'm Deborah Thompson. I'm a director at NHS Elect, and I'm responsible for the design and delivery of our national programmes that you might have been part of or heard of. We've got some large-scale programmes around ambulatory emergency care, acute frailty, and more recently specialised clinical frailty. And for all of our programmes, a pillar of those programmes is experience-based design. But before I go into the details of that, I'll just hand over to Lisa to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Lisa Godfrey. Again, a director with NHS Elect. I've got a clinical background, and prior to joining Elect, held a number of director posts in acute hospitals. I've got a particular interest in experience-based design, and as Lena said, Deb and I have worked really closely on developing these tools. So it's lovely to be here.
Okay, so I shall start the presentation now and remove myself from your screens, so relax. So some of these slides might be you might be familiar with if you've done our programs. It really is a firm pillar of the quality improvement approach we take. But today I'm going to talk to you about what experience-based design is, the tools that we have developed and can offer to you to use, and just share with you a couple of examples of where they have been used and what teams have found when they've undertaken an experience-based design study. So I hope to cover the slides in about 30-40 minutes, and then if you've got a question, please pop it in the chat box on your screen, and Lisa, I'll try and pause, but if not, do interrupt me and ask questions as we go along, and both of us will field them as appropriate. So the philosophy of experience-based design is really to engage patients in co-design of the services, and it's very much with the understanding that we will take into account what matters to them. And we know through the work that we've done that what matters to patients is quite different to what matters to clinical staffs, and that's not that that's wrong at all, but I've got a clinical background as well, and we're always very concerned with having the right numbers of staff, the right skill mix, the right equipment, the particular training that we need, and having all of the resources to hand. And patients are much more inclined to worry about what we call the soft facilities, so how comfortable they are, how well you communicate with them, what the environment is like, and often we can see that as secondary. So experience-based design is a really good way of engaging with patients to get their input into the improvements you want to make about, to your unit, service, ward, etc., and to make sure that you're making improvements that will improve the experience for all involved, be it staff, patients, carers, etc. So the ABD approach is a quality improvement methodology. It has been used across the NHS probably for 15 years now, maybe a bit more. We'll talk very much today about how you capture the experience, and then what we do to help you understand the data that you capture, and how you then move on to improving the experience. And then it's important, as with anything in quality improvement, to use that data to help you review what is happening, make improvements, and then understand the impact of those. And it might be that you have to think about the indicators that you can adopt perhaps in your dashboard or set of measures that will alert you to the fact that patient experience or staff experience is not as good as it could be, so that you then go in and do a study. Experience data is not something that you can collect on an ongoing basis. You would quite quickly be overwhelmed with data and the richness of that data. So if you can think about some indicators like number of thank yous, number of complaints, any communication incidents, those type of things that might indicate to you that experience is an issue in a service or particular area. So normally when we collect data from patients, we ask about their satisfaction, and what you'll find is this kind of distribution curve, because most people will select a middle of the road response. Patient experience studies are not looking to collect data about satisfaction, and it's sometimes quite difficult, I find, when I'm talking to teams about making that distinction. When you collect experience data, you'll find that you have a much broader response, because people are talking and giving you data about the way they feel. It's quite personal to them, so you will find that you see much less of the normal distribution curves. It's much richer data source. So this methodology is really about using experience data to gain insights into what is happening from an individual's point of view, to identify opportunities for experience. It's about their experiences and how we make them feel, and they could be patients or staff. So it's not about attitudes or opinions. These are the components of good design. In the health service, we're very good at measuring performance, at engineering processes to achieve certain levels of performance. What we're not so good at is the aesthetics of the experience. And this is where experience-based design really does come into its own. Apple are very good at those three components. They take a lot of time and trouble to understand what the experience of using their products is like, and then they build in the feedback to make the improvements, so that when you get your next iOS upgrade, it is the things that really help and give you a better experience. That's because they've got that connection, they're listening, taking note, involving users, and making improvements that will matter to them. So with experience-based design, we talk about touch points. On a normal system overview, you might look at them as process steps, but these are moments of engagement that will trigger an emotional response. So we talk about touch points and emotions. We then will present the results as an emotional map. You can present them in different ways, but we tend to use the emotional map. It's easily understood by anyone who has been involved in collecting the data, be it the patients, the staff, or other stakeholders. So you'll see across the middle here, this is a process map of a patient coming to an outpatient appointment, the normal process steps that they'll go through, and then started to collect data about how they felt. So, and that's annotated with comments that will explain why they felt that way. Now our emotional maps go into a little bit more detail, a little bit more statistical, not overly so, but as we've worked with our measurement team who are grounded in maths and statistics, they've lent a bit more detail, which I think is a good thing. I'll come on to those in a moment. So it's really about sharing and understanding the experience of patients and staff together to co-design improvements. So I'll just pause there if there's any questions at all, Lisa.
No, there are no questions at this stage.
Okay, anything you want to add at all?
No, I don't. No, I don't think there is at this point.
Okay, all right, we'll carry on. So I'm going to talk to you now about the tools and techniques that we've developed. Now, this is a questionnaire that we specifically designed for older people. We had a tool to measure patient experience in our ambulatory emergency care programme, but we went to use it in our acute frailty programme and it didn't really fit. And it was mainly because it was designed to match the journey they took. And when we started to do work with older people, we find that a large portion of that population had cognitive impairment and they couldn't always remember every aspect of the journey that they'd gone through. And we also found, as we worked with some developers to do this questionnaire, that didn't really matter so much to them. So we worked with them to understand what did matter to them and what did have an influence on their experience. And you'll see here that this is the questionnaire that was developed and we still use to this day. It's been through many PDSA cycles, but the domains that matter to older people are across the top. There's 8 of them, but and it's much, there are some kind of processes there, the being admitted, first assessment. And then they talked about how important their comfort was, how important their dignity and respect was. And so we designed the questionnaire to cover what mattered to them. So we got the domains agreed with patients. And then, of course, still thinking about this issue of cognitive impairment, how easy or not could we collect the data? So we tested using some emojis with them so they could indicate quite easily whether they were happy, indifferent or sad. And I think in the first version of this form we had 9 or 12 emojis, so we had different shades of happiness and sadness, and I think we confused ourselves as well as patients with that. So having gone through tests of change, we've decided, and probably for the last couple of years, just had you either are happy, sad or indifferent. Then we asked them to select an emotion to explain why they felt what they were feeling at that stage. Now there's some suggested emotions at the bottom of the form, but they can put their own in there. And that just helps, gives you a bit more insight. And then can add any comments at all that will help us understand why they might felt that way at that stage. We then worked with patients and clinical teams to understand how we present the results. So this is the results on one page that can be easily shared across any stakeholder group. So you'll see here again the domains along the bottom, and then the bars are the emojis. So green is a happy emoji, amber is the indifferent, and red is sad. Then the feelings are pulled through and they've got a positive sphere of the map at the top half of the page and negative at the bottom. So the overwhelming negative feeling was worry. You can see at the top the positive feelings where they were comfortable, happy and felt good. And then some of the comments Not all of them, but some have been pulled through to annotate why they might have felt that way in that domain. So you can then take this back to sit down with clinical teams and patients to say, well, this is what we found. What might we do about the admission process to make it more positive? And then start to harvest ideas to then take forward once you've discussed them as possible tests of change to see if that makes an improvement or not. We also will send through the comments that we've had in each domain, and we send through a breakdown of the emoji responses, and if you wanted to, you can set up run charts, etc. with those. We then moved on to, with the early development work, we got a strong sense that clinical teams were very keen to have this developed as a digital product. But as we were still in development, we ran it on paper for a good couple of years to make sure we had the right domains, the right questions, the right number of emojis, etc. But probably 2 years ago, we did invest in a web-based application. So it's the same domains. Patients just select the emoji to indicate how they felt in that domain, and then they can also select a feeling, or if the feeling is not there, the emotion, they can add one. They can also add a comment, and then they just click on to the next domain. Most areas now have technology, certainly now in these strange times, and they can collect the data quite easily, ideally on a tablet, but you can use phones and handheld devices too. And then the emotional map that is produced on the digital technology looks like this. And now what has happened here is another little improvement. The more an emotion is used, the bigger it is on the report. So, and you can see that quite clearly here. We also have an outpatient questionnaire, which we use for outpatient services or same-day emergency care services. This is the paper version. There are 6 different domains, and this is much more traditional in terms of it being aligned to process steps. There's 6 areas that to gather feedback on, and you can see here that we have these tools on the NHS Select website, but they're editable, if that's a real word, but you can edit them and add your own branding, and this is what Sheffield Hospital have done here. And then the outputs that you get from the outpatient look a bit like this. So you've got the emotional map bottom left. You also then have the emojis are shown as these kind of donut charts, showing you happy, sad and indifferent. And then the comments have been pulled through here, but the emotional map just looked at in a different view. So I'll stop there to see if there's any questions about those 2 tools that are available. You can download and use a paper version. We would encourage you to use the electronic ones. It's just less room for error, and it's much quicker as well. But we do have the hard copies if you want them. And I think there are some questions.
Yeah, hi Deb. Yeah, there was a question saying that it's interesting that staff were keen on the development of a web-based system or electronic systems, but what was the patient experience and compliance with it?
So we just got out for publication a study that we've pulled from the inpatient questionnaire. Patients generally need, these are older people, the inpatient questionnaire, so they generally need some help. Most places have used volunteers or back office staff just to help patients complete the questionnaire. But the data we pulled from that, bearing in mind we encourage individual hospitals to do a study of between 30 and 50 patients, that large sample had 671 in there. And we've had quite a few sites present patient experience studies back to us, and it hasn't come up as an issue with patients using the technology. Does that answer the question? We haven't looked specifically, but it hasn't come up as an issue at all.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose my reflection is that, you know, there are kind of a set of reasonably simple principles that underpin the experience-based design approach, and various kind of adaptations depending on the specialty or the patient group, and so there's that tailoring. But you know, whichever sort of version we've used, you know, get incredibly powerful results. You know, and it's in my experience, it's been really, really effective, and they're so well received, these reports, in organisations. I don't know if any of you who are listening have participated in experience-based design, but the reports tend to go down really, really well in organisations.
Okay, so there's a question about how do you adapt these for people who have learning disability or autism. I think you would probably have to create something specific and do some work to so the principles you could apply, certainly, but a bit like we found with older people, we had to develop something specific for that population, because the standard tool that we used didn't really meet their needs. So I would say that you would have to spend a little bit of time with them to understand what matters to them in terms of having a good experience, and then design your tool around that. What do you think, Lisa?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, in the way that you've described the development of the tools for frail older people, you'd similarly need to understand the kind of journey that what areas of experience for people with a learning disability or autism are we interested in. So that definition around what's the kind of pathway, as it were, but also is the, you know, what are the best visuals and so on, to make it an effective tool.
Yeah, so we worked with some of the national leads that work with older people with dementia, and to make sure that we had kind of covered as much as we could the issue around them having cognitive impairment. So I guess would need to be some of that done too, but the methodology you could use would just need to be some design work, and there may have been some. There isn't a patient experience team in NHS England, so it might be worth just checking if they've done anything on it or planning to do anything on that. I would imagine they would welcome your expression of interest on that.
And there is a follow-up question about whether to share the research, or where to source the research, I guess. You know.
Oh, I've got some references at the end. Yeah, we can pick up on that there. So what about staff? They're as important, but as we usually do in healthcare, we focus on the patients first. That's not a bad thing, but we have developed more tools for staff. We have some that we've had for some time that I haven't brought along today, but you can access them. There's one called A Day in the Life of, which is a simple form that you would give to every member of staff in your team, and you would ask them how did you feel today? What was the best thing about today? What was the worst thing? What could we or you do differently that would give you a better day at work? And you could give one of those to every member of your team, gather them in, and then that starts to give you data about their experience and highlight areas for improvement. And then there's another one that asks, I can't remember the name of it actually, but it's where you might want to focus on a particular pathway. So you would perhaps say, can you think about patients that have had a deep vein thrombosis? Did you feel happy delivering this pathway of care to them? What worked well, not so well, etc. Or if you were delivering a service, say, around lung cancer or something like that, then you might want to use that type of questionnaire for the staff. What I'm going to talk about now are questionnaires specifically designed to be used alongside the patient tools I've just talked about. I think there might be another. Yeah, so we've got the references at the end. So this is, if you think about the inpatient questionnaire for older people, we have designed a questionnaire for staff. So, and that's, if you think back to what I said in the beginning about what's important to staff in terms of what they're doing and what's important to patients, they can be two quite different things. So this is asking staff to think about when patients are being admitted, how happy do they feel delivering care in that domain? And so again, they're asked to, were they happy, sad or indifferent? What were their emotions? And they're slightly different to patients because it might be that they felt confident, or it might be that they felt downtrodden or apologetic, that type of thing. So the domains are the same, but it's the staff's perspective of their experience in delivering care within those domains. Now, we don't have this one electronically yet. It's quite a new tool, but I can I'll share with you some results from that. So this is again an emotional map that has been created following a staff response. We changed the colours because we just found that if they were the same colours, then people would glance and think it was a patient results, when in fact it's the staff. So you can easily differentiate between the two. But the pink is positive, the yellow is indifferent, and the blue is negative. This was a test we did, so you can see here some of the annotations. The emotions weren't pulled through onto this map, but you kind of get the idea of what it might look like. So then the important thing is to then present them both together to understand if there's a real disconnect between the staff experience in those domains and the patients. So I think it's fair to say that the patients seem happier than the staff, but these maps are quite similar. So this is an example that we've done recently around a cardiac service. Now this is what you would then take into a focus group where you've got staff and patients to say, can we talk about these areas where there's a bit mixed feeling on both sides? What can we do within this domain that might make it a more positive experience for all? And then the ideas will come out and you'll decide if you can take them forward or not. So if we then look at it in practice, shall I pause for questions there, Lisa? If there's any questions about the
no, there weren't any further questions, so we can carry on.
Okay. So this is just, I really like this, and I show this slide a lot, and I'm sure if you've seen it before, you'll be groaning at this stage. But I really like the way that at Barts Health, they took the time to think about what their patient experience project might be and how it blended with the model for improvement. So you can see the plan, do, study, act there, and their actions within each stage of that. And I really, really like that. I think that's clear to everyone. It's almost like your kind of project overview document or plan on a page. This was their inpatient questionnaire results. So you can see here, telltale sign of using the app is that it looks like it's computer generated, and it was. The emotions are larger if they were, the more they're used, and you can see here the emoji responses. So they didn't have anyone that was indifferent. They were either happy or sad, but it clearly shows you the areas where there's a need perhaps for improvement, and it's very common to have the improvement needs in the bookends of the journey. So at entering the service and leaving is are often the areas where you need to concentrate your improvement. They also get, like I said, the emojis shown as percentages. Matt, if you know from our measurement team, would start talking about cumulative run charts, etc. But we leave all that to him. He gets very excited about presenting the data in that way. They get the comments as well as a Word document so that they can look in more detail if they want to. So this is just another example where, as Lisa said earlier, a team adapted the questionnaire to meet their needs. So this was oncology. I'm sure it was one of your sites actually, Lisa. But you can see here that they've changed the domains a little bit, not a lot, but and they didn't particularly use the emojis. They didn't feel that that was appropriate in an oncology setting. They asked if they felt had negative or positive, whether they were happy or sad. And then we can see here the responses of the emotions as a bar chart. Again, the context of why they felt that way. I think it was one of your sites, Lisa. I don't know if you want to say any more about that little study they did.
No, I mean, I think the key thing is this kind of illustration of the need for nuance with these tools, but versus them being validated. So the main tools that we've developed are all validated. They've been tested on hundreds of patients over time. But it's also important to enable sites looking at a particular specialty to just be able to do that adaptation. And for this group of looking at cancer patients, I think there were lung cancer patients that, having emojis, just, the team felt really strong that wasn't an appropriate thing to do. And also is the entry point and end point, so were different. So this was entry to the oncology service as opposed to first outpatient appointment. So it's quite a nice illustration of how a team have done some quite deep thinking about how they're going to extract the best possible kind of patient experience data.
And then they asked some supplementary questions about areas that they felt quite strongly about, and that was fine. This is around shared decision making, at the top of most of our agendas, and then specifically looking down into the feelings at key points. And interestingly, they'd identified that waiting had a negative impact on experience, and we know that from the work that we've done. So they specifically wanted to look at whether patients were happy with the length of time that they were there in the clinic, and it's quite reassuring that the majority were happy. And just some other questions that they asked. And then in terms with them, and this would be the same for everyone, you just need to check the results to make sure that they seem right, and particularly if you've gathered the data on paper, because sometimes data fields are missed out, so you need to almost collect more than you need, because you will have to discard some. Share them with the team to let them see the results. And then the most important thing that doesn't always happen is sitting them down with patients to talk to them about the results, sharing them with them and saying, okay, so we can see that there's some negative aspects to your experience at this point in your journey. What can we put in place that will make it more positive for you? And then take the ideas from them rather than clinical teams will step in and make them up for themselves. It's most important that you gather them from patients, and then once you've made the improvements, to then go back and do the study again. So just pause there for any questions. I've only got a couple of slides then till I conclude the session.
Yeah, there are no further questions.
Okay.
I mean, I've got a personal one, I guess, which is, what are your recommendations, Deb, when a team has undertaken experience-based design about where to share? You know, so you share with the core team. Have you other thoughts about where it can helpfully go?
Yeah, so what I haven't said is that before you get started on your study, do involve your kind of whomever is leading on your patient involvement, your PALs, PPI, whatever, whoever, involve them up front. If you have already patient representation or a focus group in the hospital, check it out with them. We have posters and what have you to go along with the tools, because what we found was when we first started doing studies with sites and gathering data, patients, visitors would come in, they say, oh, they've been asking me some very strange questions today, and then they would get a lot of mopping up trying to explain what was going on. But posters saying that there's a study being done, letting people know what's happening. I've seen it be very powerful in terms of being used as part of a business case. Not that the improvements patients want to make often cost much. They're usually very simple, and they might be about staff being better informed, communicating better, smiling more, saying what their name is, that type of thing. But I've seen there was a hospital up north who had done some work on patient experience. They were running a same-day emergency care service, and they'd identified that the facilities in the waiting room were very much lacking, and because patients spent a fair bit of time in this service, they were having a whole kind of admission microwaved into one day, that was where the most negativity was sparked. So they'd invested in providing refreshments and better furniture and some magazines and what have you. And in a few months down the line, in one of their SIP meetings, they were told that they needed to stop buying magazines, and they weren't having the refreshments anymore, just trying to save some money. But they were able to provide the evidence that said that this had come up. They'd put the improvement in place, the patient experience had improved, so they managed to keep their facilities. So I thought that was quite a neat little story to tell. The other thing is, in Portsmouth, they found that the most negative part of the patient's journey was around communication, and they actually went on to do some interviews with patients to understand what it was about the communication that needed to be improved. And they talked about staff not introducing themselves. They talked about the importance of just when you walk up to them to smile, that makes all the difference. And they created 6 short films of patients describing how important that was to them, and they then incorporated that into staff training around communications. So I think that was a really powerful thing to do, but very nice, and exactly what the patients were saying was needed. So what's next then? We've got a new version of the inpatient tool, actually, because I alluded to the fact that we've done a large-scale study about a year ago, actually. We had a fellow with us and a graduate management trainee at the same time. So we gave them it as a project, and they took all of the data out of the web-based tool and to look for themes and identify areas for improvement, and then had the devil's own job trying to access a patient group to do the co-design with. So that was interesting, and we hear that from our sites as well, that sometimes it can be very tricky to sit down with a patient group, particularly if you're dealing with older people. So what we've done is the web-based questionnaire now. If a negative response is put in, either a feeling or an emoji, it will pop up and say, what could we do to improve this part of the experience for you? So it harvests the ideas at the same time as collecting the data. So that will help, hopefully, with the co-design. And the other thing on the new electronic form is at the end it asks if the contributor would mind being contacted to be involved in the co-design when the data collection is concluded. And so that you end up with 2 things, some ideas for improvement aligned to the areas that have been negative, and also then some contacts that you can make contact with to either do an interview to get more insight or invite them into a focus group. So hopefully that's helpful. We're just, it's finalised, it was tested, seemed to do what we wanted it to and what was helpful, but it hasn't been out on a wider scale yet, but it's there ready to use. We've got a staff version of the outpatient tool. We've got a staff version of the inpatient one, but we've just developed one for the outpatient one. That's on paper at the moment. We have developed a module, a virtual module on experience-based design that you can access and complete and get a certificate at the end of that. And the study I spoke about has been accepted for publication in the Journal of Patient Experience, so we should see that anytime soon. This is our experience-based design module on our Moodle platform. So you can access that through NHS Select. You need to just email and ask us for access. And then you asked for some references and research around experience-based design. It's not a fantastic amount because it's a much softer side of research. It's much more qualitative, but there is some. There's also other resources. There is a patient experience team, albeit quite small and perfectly formed, that work for NHS process improvement. The King's Fund had spent a lot of time developing resources. They call it experience-based co-design, so it's EBCD. And I think that has moved over to another platform now, but if you go to the King's Fund, it automatically takes you there. And then some resources on the Point of Care Foundation. So a fair bit there for you to be looking at if you want to. And that's it for me. I'm happy to take any more questions or comments. And Lisa will be too. Thank you.
So I don't know if people have any final kind of comments or reflections to make. We'd be really happy to take those. We'd also be interested in any EBD work that you've undertaken in your own organisations. It's always really great to hear what other people are doing. I just had a question, Deb, is what's the kind of magic number in terms of the number of patients that you should survey? Because it depends on the patient group and so on. So what would your recommendation be?
Yeah, so we usually say aim to gather data from 50. That will turn into probably 30 in reality, and that seems to be a good number.
Yeah.
You aim for 30, you'll get 10. So aim for about 50, and then you should end up with at least 30 data sets that can then be used for analysis.
Okay. What about for a less common condition, or where you haven't necessarily got such high volumes? Would you just conduct the survey over a longer period of time until you get that number, or would it be satisfactory to work with smaller numbers?
I think with smaller numbers, that you might want to use another technique. So
okay.
You might want to do insight interviews, or
yeah.
There are other techniques that I haven't talked about today, the goldfish bowl technique, etc. But they're available on the NHS Select website. I think with smaller groups, you can be more personal, and you can use them in combination as well. But the insight interviews work very well for
Yes.
their conditions and small groups.
Brilliant. I think we've got generic tools on our NHS Select website that members can access. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, and they can put their own branding on them. They can edit them.
Excellent.
9 different ones on the NHS Select website.
Oh, we've had a question. Have you any feedback on this being used in primary care pathways for any particular interventions? Hello?
Yeah, I'm thinking.
Yeah. Are you thinking? I mean, it's not primary care pathways as such, but we did some work with a community trust who were really keen to understand, from an experience-based design perspective, the experience of people receiving care in their own homes. And so, we did a design piece about understanding, and again, that was something that was quite difficult to quantify because it wasn't necessarily a pathway with a start point and an end point, but it was much more about that, that specific intervention in a person's own home. We've got some really, really good insights from that. So there are some examples around. There aren't that many that I've come across personally, because certainly when we're doing the community piece, there wasn't a kind of blueprint that we could access. It was very much about kind of developing something.
Yeah. So Portsmouth followed patients back to their own home and did the interviews with some of them, and I've spoken to some primary care colleagues about how they would approach it in primary care, but I'm not aware of a particular study. But then we are quite focused on acute providers, so we wouldn't necessarily pick that up. If theoretically, it's absolutely possible, and you know, you would apply the principles and get the same richness of data that would help shape improve for sure.
And if, for example, you want to take forward an experience-based design approach with patients who maybe have got some communication difficulty or something, would you invite carers in that instance to participate?
Yeah, absolutely. So carers are put in place, because our inpatient one is specifically for older people, and the older people with frailty, very often, of which 70% have got cognitive impairment. So yes, involve carers and or another person to help them complete or the form or input into the tablet. So, you know, I've worked with a hospital where the librarian did it and went round, or other hospitals have used volunteers, and it's something that you can involve the workforce in. That, and you know, I've heard of people coming out of HR to help collect data, and it's, you know, it's good for them as well to be more at the front line, because they're all supporting delivery of that. To get them more involved in it has been a great thing for them as well. So yeah, I would say that when you plan your study, you need to think about who might help patients input the data as needed.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I mean, I've come across lots of models of, you know, where, you know, student nurses have done it as part of, you know, a project. You mentioned volunteers, back office staff. Yeah, I mean, the geriatricians, I've had consultants participate in that. So there's a whole range of ways you can approach it. So I think that's, so we've got no more questions. Deb?
Okay, well, I hope that was helpful. I hope it was what you expected today. My email's there if anyone's got any questions, needs any more information, would like to send through their views. Very happy for you to email me directly and I can pick up with you there. If not, you will find information about experience-based design on NHS Elect's website or on either of our programme websites, which are ambulatoryemergencycare.org.uk or acute frailty. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.